Oh,
It's empty.
Evil. I need a coffee. I need stimulants. It's been such a rush this morning that I haven't even said to Ben, "How are you, Ben?"
Thanks, Carlos. I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Well, you know how I am. I've just been ranting on
You're
about
frazzled.
how challenging my morning's been. How are you arriving? What's your morning been? That's like, you know all about mine, and I might share for the viewers later.
My morning, it's been good actually. So, two kids, they go to school, obviously, because that's the conventional thing for kids to do. But the younger one really likes going to breakfast club, which is like a kind of extra playtime in the morning. So, but he is itching to get out of the house by about 10 to 8. So he's kind of gone. And the slightly older one had a football thing or something. So they were actually out of the house by 5 to 8. So all was quiet. I actually had a little meditate after they'd gone in preparation for this, which is like the opposite of your morning, I think, by every measure. So I'm arriving pretty good, pretty calm, pretty easy. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I hate you. I thought I meditated, I had a bit of quinoa, and I journaled.
Obviously.
A bit of quinoa porridge to start the day, followed by some really intense breathing exercises.
Yeah, there we go.
And jumping in a nice bath. Mm-hmm. Good morning, Emily. Lawrence is joining us. Yes, smug. You and your kids, you want to get out of early so you can have the morning to yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, I had a bit of the opposite. It was a bit of a manic morning, just trying to lateral flow test my daughter in a short period of time. And for any of you who've tried to stick stuff up your own noses, doing it to a child.
Definitely don't do it to children. That's unacceptable.
Oh my god, I just realized what you. Oh god, it's one of those today. Sorry, everyone. It's going to generate quite quickly. Yes, don't stick stuff in kids' noses that shouldn't be there. Right. Pull it together. What are we here to do? We are here to continue this kind of 3-episode series around hourly versus project versus value-based pricing. We're going to kind of reflect on the pros and cons around each one, the practicalities and the ideal situations that we'd love to have around those approaches. It's based on an article that I found on Medium a couple of weeks ago about freelancers' story, how value-based pricing was he was just finding it too difficult, and he was like resorting essentially back to, in a sense, just selling his time by the hour because he found that more simple. Today, last week we talked about the sort of the reasons why people use hourly-based pricing or sell by the hour. Today we're going to talk more about this idea of selling projects, and it feels like to me a nod to value-based pricing. This idea of like, okay, we're going to give you a price and it's going to be based on a lot of information that you're going to give us. But from my experience, and this is the contentious bit that I'm going to put out there, what you're just doing is hourly-based pricing, but packaged up. And in the end, it is just an itemized bill of time. In our case, when we're a web design company, designers' time, technical architects' time, project managers' time, developers' time, add it all up, that's how much you're going to pay. So that's the opening gambit, is actually when you think you're doing project-based pricing and you think it's like value-based and it's trying to make it less about pay as you go, it's still you're selling your time, and that isn't necessarily a useful way to go for yourself or your client. Anything that you can add on to that, Ben, or that springs up to you?
So I think one of the things when we were talking around the pricing by the hour last week, we're talking some, because there's obviously pros and cons with all of these things. And like, the person in the article was talking about, there was a convenience thing, which is why they were kind of defaulting to the hour. So we kind of sort of looked at some of those kind of pros and cons. And so the same thing with with projects, I think to your point, actually in most instances, all people are really doing is charging by the hour with some sort of cap on it. And a cap which they bear the cost of. Essentially, the client gets some sort of surety, and then they kind of assume a kind of maximum amount that they will earn. But in the same kind of spirit of kind of pros and cons, because of course one of the things that we spoke about, whenever we are selling anything or whenever we're buying anything, but more usefully, there's always an element of kind of risk. There's always an element of uncertainty, and what we're always trying to do, this is kind of true for almost kind of anything that we buy, and is definitely true for the things that everybody kind of listening to this would be selling. There is, like I said, there's uncertainty in that. There's some ambiguity. There's a little voice somewhere in the mind of the person on the other side of the table, or the people on the other side of the table. Is this going to do the thing that I want it to do? And what we're always trying to do is remove that uncertainty to make things as kind of sort of sure as possible. And of course, one of the problems which we sort of spoke around with kind of pricing by the hour is theoretically it has an unknown ending, and so that adds a huge layer of uncertainty into the kind of heart and mind of your customer, of your client, when you're agreeing the work that you will do. So of course, what we want to do is we want to remove uncertainty. We want to remove ambiguity. And the more that we can do that, the easier actually we make it for our customer and our client to buy. So whilst the kind of charging by kind of projects are more often than not just a kind of total of the time we think it's going to take. And that is just a cost actually that we as the supplier, we as the provider, the creator, that's a cost we bear. One of the pros is when we present a fixed amount to a client, a project amount, a project fee, that comes with lots of kind of sort of surety and certainty, which is a kind of hugely important part of what we need to do. So even within this, kind of, you can already see some pros, some cons that come with adopting a kind of project pricing approach. That's
awesome. And thank you, Neil, for this question. I'd like to get back to that around sort of value pricing and mixing that into a time-based pricing. I think you picked on what came up for me when you're talking, the most important thing here is the perception of risk and the removing uncertainty. And so the example that springs to mind is I'm getting an awning fixed on our house here, and I have no idea how long it'll take, but I say I want it fixed, and so the person who's doing the work, a couple of people sort of quoted me, they've given me costs based on their time. And while it's given like a very clear kind of removed some of the uncertainty of how this is working in terms of the numbers, it's like, but I just want to get it fixed. And so is it worth 2 hours of someone's time, 3 hours of someone's time? Actually, it's nothing to do with how much time they spend on it. It's like, how much is it worth for me to get this awning fixed? And like, the awning protects the patio from the sun in the summer. I was going to get a big umbrella. Those things cost like 500, 600 quid if you want a really nice one. And then if you want to get it fixed, it costs more. So it's like, okay, I already anchored my mind in terms of how much this is going to cost. The reason for this kind of like random narrative is like, on one hand, I could say, all right, I just want 2 hours of your time. Give me 2 hours of your time and do what you can in that. I don't want that. I want it fixed. I don't want 2 hours of someone's time and then nothing. It was still at the same space. So that's what springs to mind in terms of, one hand, we're granting a level of clarity in terms of, oh, this is how much you're paying for. But I think maybe as customers and as clients even, we're hiding from the fact of all we want is to know it's going to get done. Mm-hmm. What's important to us is how much are we willing to pay in order for that to get done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then that kind of that sort of starts to point to the other things. So taking the awning example further, the thing that happens, they may say it takes some time, but essentially what you're then doing is you're comparing kind of total amounts. That person says £60, that person says £90, that person says £300. So we're not actually then looking at how much sort of time it takes anywhere. We're just looking at the amount. So it still is then comparable to other people, and you buying the service kind of feel like you need to compare it because you have no idea. Should this cost £60? Should it cost £300? I have no idea. And so the same thing kind of happens then when we do kind of put a fixed price on it. We're still kind of asking the client, asking our customer to go compare us to somebody else, which of course we don't really want to do. And the kind of interesting thing, which might be a kind of leap, the kind of relatively interesting thing in the context of the conversation is, there will be a whole load of criteria which kind of are sort of important to you, like when you want it done, the times of day that you might want it done, other kind of factors essentially, which are important that you are kind of thinking about, which, the client or the client, the kind of supplier, it's kind of the opportunity is for them to talk to you about those things, because actually what it's worth, what it should cost, all of that is about all of that. Yes, there's a kind of comparison in your mind. Should I have a big umbrella which costs £500, or should we fix this thing, which costs kind of less than that? Then there's a whole range of other kind of variables which are important to you. And the kind of the opportunity, which is, I guess, a little bit of a kind of plug for where we go in next week's session. The opportunity is to explore those things, because ultimately, if you are just defaulting to pricing by project, as you acknowledge, yes, there's some certainty in it, but there's still uncertainty because I don't know if that total amount is a good total amount to pay or not. So even with a kind of fixed price thing, we are still asking our client and customer to compare us to somebody else. And of course, as soon as they compare us to someone else, there is a risk that they choose to go a different route.
Yeah. Well, there's two things around that comparison to other people. Firstly, it's accepting that when you just put a price out there with little else information, there's only one thing that your customer can do is just look at that number and look at other numbers. But the other thing I think, particularly for people in our community, people who have a challenge with kind of putting a price out there, putting a price on their services or products, just because someone doesn't choose you has potentially nothing to do with you. It's to do with the situation that customer is in at the time when they want to make a decision. And maybe it's purely based on money. Maybe they really love what you do, but they only have 60 quid. And that's as far as they can go, or that's as far as they mentally can go in terms of spending something. And then on terms of the kind of what that price that you give, say this guy charging me 300 quid, what's in that in terms of value for me? Partly of it is like, I don't want to deal with anything. I don't want to open the door for people. I don't want to have to stick around for someone who might, need to ask me loads of questions. I just want someone to do it, sort it out. If someone says, I can do that for you, it costs this much, like, in a sense, nearly the price isn't so much of an issue anymore. It's the convenience I'm buying. And so I'm kind of like, I'm in that space where actually I value my time so much, I don't want to deal with that. I'm willing to pay for someone to take that problem away from me and not to be around that. And so there's that element I wanted to stress here. It's like, again, it's nothing to do with the time in the end. It's something else that I'm buying other than the solution and the amount of time someone spends on it.
Yeah. One of the things you were saying in there was about whether the client or the customer does choose you or not, and kind of pointed to that actually there will be so many kind of factors which are at play. And always useful just to remind everybody that when they are choosing, it's not about you. They're not making a value judgment on you and whether I kind of like you or don't like you. They are making a kind of judgment based on a whole load of factors that either we do understand or we kind of don't understand, but they are really personal to the person on the other side of the table. And so that's always useful to remember, just because I think one of the reasons people kind of trip up or really don't like the sales process is we too often think it is a value judgment on us. So worthwhile just to kind of remind and make that point. But it does also kind of point to the other kind of opportunity with this, is that as soon as we remember it's not about us, but it is about the other person, the person on the other side of the table, or the people on the other side of the table, that kind of invites us then to go, okay, well, let's really try and understand all of the things which are important to them, because the better I understand those things, the more likely I am able to help them kind of solve those things to kind of meet their needs. And the more likely it is, the easier it will be for them to buy. And also it starts to kind of point to what, in your case with the thing, what something is actually kind of worth. And that is the sort of dance that we are talking about, of course, with the kind of pricing course. And actually everything behind all of this is, it is a dance. It is an exploration. It is an opportunity to understand, what clients and customers are maybe not saying about what's important to them, and how you kind of uncover those things and how you learn about those things, because that really starts to point to what something is worth. The whole thing, the reason we kind of default to pricing by time, the reason we default to pricing by a project is, like we were talking about, we do want to give certain, we want the client or customer to feel certainty, but also we're trying to get out of the uncomfortableness of kind of not knowing. So everybody is just trying to find a sort of a kind of short circuit, but ultimately, really the question is it a short circuit which really serves your needs?
I think that's a really interesting point there about the short circuit that serves your needs and the customer's needs. I was going to say that, or add on to that. For those of you who just joined us, who just caught us halfway through, we're exploring this idea of project-based pricing, the pros and the cons. It's part of this series of thinking about hourly-based pricing, project-based pricing, and ultimately value-based pricing. We've been touching on this side. The core principle, I think, about this is trying to remove as much uncertainty as possible from the client's mind about how they understand the value of this number that you're giving them. One of the hacks, I'm going to call it a hack actually, that we're introducing with project-based pricing is like putting and measuring things up in based on time, so that they think, I'm buying so many hours of this person's time, so many hours of this person's time. I now understand how you came up to this number, and that's great for removing that uncertainty. But in the end, that number is still going to be something that they need to get used to or come to grips with. And I really wanted to get on to Neil's point in a minute, but I just wanted to just reflect on another bit of this story that I remember from my agency days with Lawrence, that is to do with also the nature of the product and what you're selling. Now, we used to sell websites. We then went on to building on essentially helping startups build their digital product. And the trouble with that, it was inherently uncertain path, really inherently uncertain. But people wanted, or we thought people wanted, a fixed price. And so we thought they want certainty based on this number. But that created so much hardship for us when it came to actually, this isn't the way we need to go, or actually, we're not sure this is the right thing, or even the customer decided, actually, this is not right. So then we had to spend so much time on that change control, for want of a better term, process of, let's rescope, let's rethink, let's rebudget. And that was really, really painful. And so on one hand, I think people wanted that certainty of how much am I going to spend, but actually we couldn't sell that, but we were trying to. And I think the point I'm trying to make is we didn't understand what we were selling. We thought we were selling a finished product, but actually we were selling a process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so then that kind of raises questions around how projects are managed. Because, like I said, the kind of, I think, knowing what they're buying, which of course is an outcome, a change, something changing in the world. Then there is a route to how that change comes to bear for the client, and your kind of insight there that actually the route that they kind of follow is a process. It is a journey. So it's not that there is necessarily just an absolute kind of fixed point. There is some kind of there is some sort of journey to that. And so then I guess then the kind of challenge is how you are addressing the kind of client's sort of kind of feeling of uncertainty. How do you sell a journey with a relatively unknown outcome when what everybody wants is certainty? That's then the kind of the task, the art.
Yeah, and that's where I think project-based pricing, you got to really consider when you're pricing based on a project, what that means and whether that's the best way to sell what you do. For instance, if someone's the way I look at it, one of the reasons we try and create budgets is so that we can predict for ourselves profitability. Is this job worth doing ourselves? And the best way to really nail down profitability is know exactly what you're doing and how long it's going to take you. And so if you're making something again and again, if you're building a set of houses and there's nothing that's really going to change much with that house, you've got real clear idea of what it takes to make that happen, then I think selling based on a project approach can work, though arguably next week we'll talk about value. But ultimately, what it is, it's repeatable, and then it's just a case of you being able to explain that number to your customer. And one way is you could do the project-based pricing, and it kind of helps them come to terms with how much they're spending without it suddenly being, oh my god, it's not finished yet, we're going to overrun, we need to overspend and stuff like that. So that's what I was trying to get to in terms of there are opportunities to still use that pricing, because also the industry and customers, they understand it. I think that's part of the thing. Is like, if you're trying to convert your customer into a new way of spending their money and selling them something that's uncertain, that's taking a lot of time. And if you have a lot of time because you've got a big profit margin with that particular piece of work, all good. But at some point, I think you've got to factor in the cost of acquiring the customer as well as delivering the project into the whole thing.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, somebody just wants an awning.
Exactly. That's it. I just want
an awning.
No,
stop messing with me.
No, I don't want an awning. I want to sit with my gin and tonic.
There we go.
Outside.
Yeah.
Enjoying the beautiful weather without the sun beating down on my head.
There we go. Want your
and I want
family
to do that
time
this summer, next summer, the summer after, and
wow.
And that's the good feeling that and see, now I understand that. How much do I pay for that? I need someone to help me to understand how much that's worth.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, bit of a tangent. We'll talk more about this next week.
Your awning.
Let us.
Your shade.
No, because then my gin and tonic gets warm, and then all the little nibbles on the table get warm, and then my family gets warm. I'm like, no, we all want to sit in the cool. Steph, yeah, it isn't just simple solutions that get you out of these challenges. Anyway, moving on. All right, Neil is asking, all right, can't you build in value pricing into your hourly rate? If you feel like your hourly rate doesn't reflect that, then increase it. That means it might seem less competitive to clients, but it creates greater transparency when pricing projects. Interesting points, and I agree with him to a certain degree. I don't know if anything jumps out at you, Ben.
One thing I'll say before I answer Neil's question, thanks Neil's question, I think it might be something to do with the very slow processing of my brain, that reading, thinking, and talking all at sort of the same time.
Look at that fucking meditation you done in the morning, Ben. You're just too zen right now.
But I appreciate it doesn't really work. But what did you say this was called? Because it's not called a podcast or a webinar. What was the
live stream? This is a live stream.
So clearly, it's not really possible to do a live stream actually, it worked for Boris Johnson, didn't it? I could just go.
Excuse me, pig world now.
Excuse me. Hold on. Sorry. Forgive me. Forgive me. But anyway, that's not answering Neil's question. Nor is that helping me think about answering Neil's question.
Let me kick it off.
Okay.
So I did this. I remember doing this. Is like, okay, used to charge around about, I think, as a freelancer, 120 quid an hour. And I started getting projects where people wouldn't pay more than maybe like 100, 150 quid for a quick web dev thing. So I ended up increasing my rate to 250 quid an hour and saying, oh, it'll take me half an hour. And it was this way of like getting into this space of like, yeah, I can get paid more, but I don't have to charge that amount of money. I just now can essentially is it anchor or just frame the value that they're willing to, or the amount they're willing to pay based on, the kind of the value I have in my time. Yeah. So in what I think Neil is saying is like, if you really value yourself, if you're so good, basically, that actually you're, if someone's wants 60 quid's worth of wants to pay 60 quid for, I don't know, creating a little JavaScript widget, and this is my dev days, and it's going to take you 10 minutes. Well, maybe my time is worth 360 quid an hour, because I can do that in 10 minutes, and I could do a lot more in an hour. So that's how I understand Neil's things. Okay, right. Well, just factor in that bit, and I think that's what we did, anyways. An agency, as a project manager, you had this rate. As a junior developer, you had this rate. As a junior designer, blah blah blah, and you kind of had this kind of shopping list of prices, which I don't think really helped the client in the end. It's just like, oh my god, all these numbers.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so he's trying to factor in this perception of value, but still structure it in some kind of hourly rate.
Yeah. And so now, thank you for that, because that gave me a chance to think about what Neil said. So I guess there's a couple of things in what you're sort of saying in there, Neil. So there, and same as you said, Carlos, I agree to a point, because the thing with value is subjective. What the value of something is a subjective thing. What I think is valuable, what Carlos, thinks is valuable with his awning is different to what I might think is valuable with my awning or versions thereof. So value is a subjective thing, and it's not for us to say. But I think what is kind of implicit in what you're saying, Neil, is that, of course, there is also scope for kind of quite a lot of variation on what the kind of hourly rates are. And I was kind of reminded of two things, actually. One was the conversation that Carlos, we had with David McAndrew. Have I remembered his name correctly? No, McQueen.
Oh, David McAndrew. David McQueen. Yes. Sorry, David. David McAndrew, like a golfer. And
so he was sort of talking about early on when he was giving his talk. So a lot of his work is about kind of giving this talk, speaking at conferences, and he was charging an amount for doing those things. And for various kind of number of reasons, he kind of recognized that he could charge more. He needed to charge more to meet his needs and various other things. So he started to kind of significantly increase what he was charging, and he kind of recognized that if he was going to do that, he just, the measure was obviously not I'm now going to talk for longer. If I'm charging twice as much, I'm not all of a sudden now talking for longer, but that the value of my talk needs to increase. And so then it begs the question, well, how does the value of my talk increase? What are the measures which need to change? What are the things that need to change for the value of it to change? And there's kind of a few things, like maybe the audiences that he's speaking to, kind of specific people that he's speaking to, but there is also a kind of self-perception thing there. How do I kind of judge and feel about my own value? And I think there is a real tendency for people to kind of, if you kind of ask them how they kind of judge or feel about their own value, that they would kind of talk themselves down. And so there is a kind of, to your word from earlier in the session, Carlos, there is a bit of a hack, actually, that actually as soon as we do start to charge more, because part of what Neil's talking about is charging more, actually there is a benefit in that it does affect how we feel about our own work. So it is an important thing to do. And the other thing I was kind of reminded of was something I've sort of spoken about on here before. There was someone who used to work for me in my last design business, and he works freelance these days. And I was talking to him. I know obviously how much he charges, and but there's another guy who we know who these guys, they're the same age. They went to they were both at the kind of Royal College of Art at the same time, so same qualifications. They've worked for the same amount of time. One person, his rate is 10 times the amount of the other person. And so in a sense, what you might say, to your point, Neil, what he's done is that he has built value into the price. And of course, in a sense he has, but what he's kind of done is that really he's just charging much more. He's much more kind of confident about it. He understands that then there's only certain people who can buy that thing. So he's just, it kind of breeds it talks to a confidence. and it talks to being able to kind of offer your thing to certain people. Is it pricing by value? Less so, because you're not, value is a subjective thing, and value kind of changes on a case-by-case basis. But so I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying, yes, Neil, there's definitely kind of sort of truth in that. But I think what we'll sort of talk a little bit about next week are the specifics of value, whereas what you're talking about is kind of confidently pricing what you're worth.
Yeah. And I think just on that, the pricing in terms of value, yes, I agree, Neil. If you're going to work with that client once and you're going to put a number of, give them a set of a price based on these rates based on your own value, what you think you're worth rather than just what a market says you're worth. That makes sense. But then if you are going to continue with that client, now they've got a number on each of your people's time, the price per hour for each person's time. So unless you're able to craftily or skillfully reframe that, that's what's going to anchor them. And so now they're going to think, okay, if I have that person again for another couple of hours, that's how much I'm going to pay, which might be easier. But then I think again, depends on the nature of the project, what kind of work you're selling. I think there is something that also can be a challenge further down the line. And there's a really interesting point as well from Neil is like, if it's tough, you need to get that client in, and there's a challenge of like managing the client's perception, their perception of what they want to pay and what you're able to give, and you need that client. Yes, that's a challenge. I would then refer you to Tad Hargrave's Friday Fireside that we did on our Happy Startup School Crowdcast channel, where he talks about marketing, because ultimately, all this stuff we're talking about selling, this should be just helping people just make a decision of how they're going to engage with us and how much they're going to spend with us. If you're doing your marketing well, you will then have the right people come to you with the right perception of your value and why they want to work with you. And so that's where I think, as much as I believe and I'm really loving what I'm doing with Ben, this is just one side of the coin. Yeah. And there's so much more around marketing stuff that I think is also important. Dizzy was talking about choices. Maybe we can discuss that a bit more on the next one. Is there something easy that we can answer here? I'm just going to check what we have here with Dizzy. Is it best to offer just a couple of options, as too much choice can be paralyzing, and somehow two options are easy to choose between for a client? So it's this idea of how many options is a good number of options.
Now, so obviously Dizzy is obviously an expert, qualified pricing practitioner, having done the course. So Dizzy knows that 3 is good, because you definitely need choice, because if you don't give them a choice, your customer or client will go somewhere else. If you give two choices, the customer or client will generally just choose the one which they feel is the best one for them. If you give them 3 choices, they more often than not, or half the time, will go for the middle one. So it just means that you have a little bit more control, theoretically, over the journey.
Yeah. I think on that, being such a ninja pricing person, Dizzy, I would say it isn't about how many options necessarily. It's how easy it is for the customer to understand the options. Because you could have 2 options, but if they don't make sense, there's no way of saying, oh, I pay this for this, or I pay for that. It still isn't useful. And you could have 10 options, but they all make sense. I know I can't remember, there's a CRM system and I forget the name of it. But essentially, the options that they would provide is like, if you want this feature, you pay for that feature. If you want that feature, if you want those 4 features, pay for that. And there was a sense of like, oh, I just want to have a database of customers. I want to be able to do email, and I want to be able to respond via SMS. And I pay for those 3. And so I believe there was a sense of empowerment and choice in multiple features, but I understood how I was going to choose. And so that helped me dictate, oh, that's why I want to spend £200 a month rather than £2,000 a month, which was the full fat 10 feature thing. So, I think for someone like Dizzy or any of you who's a bit more involved in the pricing or been playing around with pricing more, I think there's much more there to play with in terms of story and getting people to understand, empower them to make good decisions for themselves rather than hacking them into making, oh, I'll go for the middle wine because I know that's going to be better than the cheap plonk or the really expensive, whatever it is, Merlot.
Middle vine. That sounds
Middle wine. Yeah, I like. Well, I think I was very passionate about that because I think one of the things I'm really conscious of is I don't want to do pricing as a way to con our customers into buying stuff. This is what we're trying to do: is think about pricing with the way I'm thinking for myself. Pricing to help me buy more powerfully. You know, not to regret spending a lot of money, like a 30 quid for a gin and tonic. Well, I was on the beach. I saw an amusing view. That's fine. I'm not going to get guilty about it. But at the same time, then us to think about, okay, how can we make our clients never regret paying however much money they want to pay with us,
nice.
rather than feel like, oh my god, how can I tease another £500 out of someone by changing the options here? So, I don't think that's sustainable. Awesome.
Hashtag never regrets.
Hashtag no regrets. No pricing regrets. Yeah, I don't think that's going to catch on,
No.
Anyway, any of you out there who listen to this who are much better at marketing than us, please get in touch. We need your help. On that note, thank you very much, Ben. I think we went over time again. Damn
it.
Our consistency. Well, we'll try again next time. We'll keep it tight, but you know, it's really nice. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Dizzy. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us, listening to us this morning. I hope this was useful. If it was, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is a happy.link/moneytube. Or you can follow us on Crowdcast if you want to join us and get alerted of the regular live streams that we're going to be doing. And of course, you click on learn more about pricing the happy way and sign up to the newsletter. And that's another way of just getting alerted of not only when these are going live, but of all the recordings that we do and any kind of musings and witterings that we decide to put into a newsletter. So until then, thank you, Neil. I'm glad that we made you laugh, at least, if not educate you a little bit.
Exactly. I didn't learn anything, but it was mildly funny.
Yes. Edutainment, as they call it. Actually, not even edu, just
tainment.
Tainted. He's tainted for the day. Oh, poor Neil. All right, take care. See you, Ben. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.